Hello everyone, かつらサンシャイン here. にはお、皆様こんにちは。Okay, a major part of this channel is for me to invite you all to follow me on my journey to bring rakugo, Japanese comic storytelling to Broadway. Or should I say off-Broadway? Wait a minute. What is the difference between Broadway and off-Broadway? Let's make this the topic of today's video. The answer is actually not quite as simple as one might think. And actually, I have had 25 experience in the theater in North America and Europe, and still the distinction between Broadway and off-Broadway has become clear to me more recently. So let's dig in. First of all, let's talk about Broadway. Even here, we have some distinctions which can be easily confused or can prove a little bit confusing. First of all, Broadway itself is a long street in Manhattan, in New York, and it goes right down the center, the middle of Manhattan, and a little bit diagonally. It is known as the oldest north-south street in New York. That's something I just found out from Wikipedia today. In the 1870s, Broadway featured, this street Broadway featured a concentration of theaters around not Times Square, where they are now, but around Union Square, which I am really thrilled to know about because I live in the Union Square area right now. It's still a very, very fun area, but actually the first collection of Broadway theaters, or of lots of theaters in New York, which were called the Broadway District, were around Union Square. And this area between Union Square and Madison Square, which is about a 30-minute walk south of Times Square, where the Broadway area is right now, between Union Square and Madison Square, the streets were so lit up by these theaters and other buildings and other entertainments. It was so lit up at the time, it was so stunning that it was nicknamed the Great White Way. And this is a nickname for Broadway and the Broadway theaters that still persists to this very day. So that's a little bit of trivia right there. Now, in the early 1900s, the theaters moved north to where they are right now. They're concentrated around Times Square. So even today, Broadway, the theater district, not the street, the theater district Broadway, and Broadway theaters are defined as the exactly 41 theaters around Broadway, the street, from 42nd Street to 52nd Street, somewhere in between there, and from 7th Avenue to 10th Avenue, around that box. And there are a few of them that are a little bit outside that box, but that's basically where they are. And so if you look at a map, they're concentrated around and in the vicinity of the street called Broadway that's going straight through New York there, but they are by all means, they're not by any means all on the street called Broadway. So that's a little bit of a distinction right there. Broadway theaters are not necessarily on Broadway, the road. Okay, one more definition. All of these theaters, to be called a Broadway theater, to be eligible for Tony Awards, which we'll get to later, the theaters must be of a capacity of 500 or more seats. It's a very important distinction, and it'll come up later when we talk about off-Broadway theaters. So the 41 theaters concentrated in this theater district, otherwise known as the Great White Way or Broadway, all have at least 500 seats. Many of them are much bigger. In fact, the biggest theater is the Gershwin Theater with 1,933 seats. So that's the span of about 1,500 seats there. So this is the key. In order to be considered a Broadway theater, it must have 500 seats or more. This brings us to off-Broadway. Many people, including myself, up until recently, thought that off-Broadway meant smaller theaters and just off the Broadway area. And just off the Broadway area means not in the heart of Broadway, but also not too far. Now, this definition is almost accurate. Remember, Broadway theaters are at least 500 seats or more, right? As a matter of fact, to be considered an off-Broadway theater, the theater must have less than 500 seats. So 499 or less is off-Broadway, down until 100. When it goes below 100 or 99 or less, this becomes off-Broadway. Which makes one wonder, if you get down to 20 seats or less, is it called off-Broadway? Let me look into that for a later video. Here's another thing. although Broadway theaters are all in that Broadway theater district, which I talked about a little bit earlier, off-Broadway theaters can actually be anywhere in Manhattan. So an off-Broadway theater does not necessarily have to be near Broadway, doesn't have to be necessarily near the Broadway district, doesn't have to be necessarily near the Broadway street. Anywhere in the Isle of Manhattan, that part of New York, as long as it's between 100 and 499 seats, it's considered an off-Broadway theater. So the area containing off-Broadway theaters is actually broader than Broadway, so to speak. It's actually greater than the Great White Way. Two little Broadway jokes. As a matter of fact, the theater I am going to be mounting rakugo, comic storytelling, in February of 2019 is right in the heart of the Broadway theater district. It's right in the heart of Broadway, but it's exactly 100 seats. So perfect for comic storytelling. So the theater is both on Broadway and off Broadway at the very same time, if you can get your mind around that one. Then let's talk about the awards. Everybody wants awards, everyone wants prizes. This is what we're going for. If we can get some prizes, then people all over the world will know us, will be famous. So if you're on Broadway, if you're in the big theaters, everybody knows those awards. They're the Tony Awards. Off Broadway, there are several different awards, but one of the main awards, and actually my favorite award for off-Broadway, is actually called the Obie Award, which is a great coincidence because the belt that goes with a kimono, I don't know if you can see it right there, that's actually called an obi in Japanese. So those of you who know karate, you will know that there's the black belt, and that in Japanese would be called the kuro obi. Kuro being black and obi being belt. So this is fantastic for me because I'm going to advertise my off-Broadway show by saying, come see Katsura Sunshine's rakugo. So I'm going to start advertising my off-Broadway, one more time. So I'm going to start advertising my off-Broadway show by saying, come see Katsura Sunshine. He already has over 10 obis.